Hello, friends. Happy to be with you again. And the subject, as I was referred to last week for this new session regarding reading the writings of Shoghi Effendi, is essential verities. This is a very central to everything in the faith, because the guardians summarized out of the whole revelation those verities which we need to understand. And he also said that it was his responsibility to clarify certain misunderstandings that had grown, particularly because of the brightness and greatness of Abdu'l-Baha. The believers had interpreted his position to be that of the Son of God, Baha'u'llah being the Father, then Abdu'l-Baha was the Son. Seemed to make a lot of sense. But that was the source of many difficulties to Abdu'l-Baha, that interpretation. He told them, no, that he was Abdu'l-Baha. He was the servant of Baha'u'llah. And the covenant breakers grabbed a hold of this, saying that Abdu'l-Baha was claiming a equal station to that of Baha'u'llah, and that was breaking the covenant of Baha'u'llah, who said a manifestation would not appear for another 1,000 years. And that gave this exaggerated love of the friends for Abdu'l-Baha, gave the covenant breakers a basis for raising the banner of opposition to Abdu'l-Baha. The time came early in the 30s. Some of the Western friends were visiting Abdu'l-Baha, pilgrims were visiting Abdu'l-Baha, amongst them Keith Ransom-Kehler. Now, Keith Ransom-Kehler was an educated and a very bright teacher of the faith. And Shoghi Effendi had decided to send her to Iran on a special mission on his behalf. And she remained in the Holy Land after the pilgrimage for 3-4 months before she proceeded to the cradle of the faith, to Iran, on the mission that he had assigned to her. It was a very challenging mission. She essentially, as I understand it, he wanted her to get the government to agree to the existence of Baha'i literature. Never mind propagating or whatever else to do, but at least that the Baha'is could have their Baha'i books. While this group of pilgrims was in the Holy Land and included other Westerners and so on, this question of the station of Abdu'l-Baha came up. And Shoghi Effendi discussed at length with the pilgrim group, all of which is recorded in a set of pilgrim notes, that the station of the Bab, he set out the station of the Bab and Baha'u'llah as the twin manifestations of God, and then Abdu'l-Baha as the exemplar of their teachings and the center of the covenant. And they said that the understanding that the American friends had, the Western friends had, is that Abdu'l-Baha was the son. In the same way Baha'u'llah was the father, Abdu'l-Baha was the son, which meant that he was the return of Jesus Christ. And Shoghi Effendi answered that this is a heresy. It's impossible. And they were totally startled. And then he set forth his views, and they brought some writings to compare at the pilgrim table, where this misunderstanding had originally come from. And that matter is covered in the section on Abdu'l-Baha in this document, the Dispensation. We'll eventually get to that. In the meanwhile, he said that to believe this about Abdu'l-Baha is a disservice, because it provided fuel to the covenant breakers and was not according to the doctrines of the faith. And the pilgrims, among them several solid Baha'i teachers, he said, if we go back and say this, the friends will just quietly listen to us, and they will say to themselves, oh, what a pity. Shoghi Effendi didn't find the capacity in this pilgrim group to state the greatness of Abdu'l-Baha's station. So he veiled it for them. And Shoghi Effendi was trying to explain that they can't do that. They have to go back and explain this. Okay, and we're talking about what, 1932, I think, was that pilgrim group. In any case, in 1934, Shoghi Effendi rose to the task of clarifying the root teachings, the root principles of the Baha'i faith in a very straightforward, clear manner. And one of the things that he had to do was, the Station of Baha'u'llah was generally understood. He reinforced it terrifically with what we're going to talk about in this session. And he had to clarify the position of the Bab, because the Bab was viewed as like John the Baptist, the forerunner of the faith, which has a cognate station. By the way, in the Quranic teachings, John the Baptist is a prophet of God who brings a book. He brings teachings. He brings laws. His law was the law of baptism, for example, and so on. In any case, clarifying the station of the Bab and then clarifying in a complete, clear way the station of Abdu'l-Baha became the center, two of the central features of this message of Shoghi Effendi in 1934, which is titled The Dispensation of Baha'u'llah, which you can, we're going to have some of the sections here on screen today, but also you can find the whole thing in the World Order as one of the letters of the collection of selected letters of the Guardian called the World Order of Baha'u'llah in English. That's been translated into a number of languages too. So this question of a clear understanding of the central figures of the faith and of the central teachings of the cause is an important motivating factor in Shoghi Effendi having set down the truths that he sets forth in the Dispensation of Baha'u'llah. Let us go now to the texts of this. Let me see if I can get that up here. I think this brings us up. This is from the Dispensation, and I've cited from a number of paragraphs here. We'll start reading through these. Now in 34, remember that the first 7-year plan began in 37. So he's preparing the Baha'i world. He's been helping the Baha'is around the world, guiding them in establishing those fundamental institutions of the local assemblies. So following the Guardian, following the Master's passing, he develops local spiritual assemblies. He clarifies the role of national spiritual assemblies and gradually begins moving the Friends towards establishing these all over the world. In 34, and again, this is, you feel that this has grown out of the seeds of the conversation he had with those pilgrims a couple of years earlier. He says the international status which the religion of God has thus far achieved, moreover, imperatively demands that its root principles be now definitely clarified. Most interesting, you know, Ria Khanum referring to this, she wasn't in the Holy Land when this was written, but in 37, she arrives on the scene and she's married. She is wed to the Guardian. And then she's heard him refer back to the Dispensation. And she states that he says that he felt in many ways that he'd stated everything he needed to state in the dispensation with regard to the future understanding of the cause. And in a sense, it was like a will, like his will. Now, Shoghi Effendi was faced with the challenge of not being able to address the discontinuity of a living guardian because he had no control over it, and there was no option in the will and testament of Abdu'l-Baha as to what you do if there's no candidate available for the post. He and Ruya Khanum had no children, and the various family members gradually deviated from the cause and took themselves, if you will, out of the running as Agsan. So there was no faithful Agsan at the time of the passing of Shoghi Effendi. Now, one would just presume, and this is a presumption because obviously all this is somehow under the command and control of our maker, of God, of Baha'u'llah, that Shoghi Effendi would have, with the establishment of the House of Justice in 63, would have had to take this matter to the House of Justice. In fact, the House of Justice says it would have had to come to them along with the guardian to discuss what alternative possibilities are there. And as we know, the House of Justice met on the subject very early on in its and it itself had to clarify the question of the continuity of the guardianship. And the guardian and everything he wrote stands at the center of the constitution of the House of Justice, and so much is derived continually by the House examining the statements and the direction that the House of Justice, that the guardian gave to the cause before the House of Justice came into being. And indeed, Shoghi Effendi said that he had taken certain decisions which were not in the writings, but as an interpretive act, he took certain decisions on a temporary basis. And he said that when the House of Justice is established, it will have to review the various sample defining that a local spiritual assembly is elected for a one-year period was one of those temporary decisions, which has been since clarified by the House of Justice and approved and accepted. He didn't speak out on the length of a period of service of members elected to the House of Justice. That was something that had to be decided by the House of Justice itself because it was not included in the Will and Testament, nor in the writings of Baha'u'llah. So now he's to go back to this quote, he's talking about root principles being now definitely clarified. Moving on in this magnificent letter, it unfolds the whole vision of the cause into the future and this station and position of the central figures, both in themselves and in relation to each other. Dearly beloved friends, I feel it incumbent upon me by virtue of the obligations and responsibilities which as guardian of the faith of Baha'u'llah, I am called upon to discharge, to lay special stress at a time when the light of publicity is being increasingly focused upon us, upon certain truths which lie at the basis of our faith, and integrity of which it is our first duty to safeguard. These verities, if valiantly upheld and properly assimilated, will, I am convinced, powerfully reinforce the vigor of our spiritual life and greatly assist in counteracting the machinations of an implacable and vigilant enemy. Now, how important these verities are that he says they have to be valiantly upheld and properly assimilated. And if we do that, these will powerfully reinforce the vigor of our spiritual life. Understanding the essential verities of the cause adds to the vigor of our spiritual life and also assists us in counteracting the attacks of enemies on the cause who would misrepresent it. But now this, I think, without going into the question here about Muhammad Ali having misunderstood or misrepresented the master's position, that was certainly one of the elements that was there. Now he goes on to say, now having told us what, if we uphold these and assimilate these truths that he set forth in this document, that to strive to obtain a more adequate understanding of the significance of Baha'u'llah's stupendous revelation, must, it is my unalterable conviction, remain the first obligation and the object of the constant endeavor of each one of its loyal adherents. So we're called on to obtain a more adequate understanding of the significance of Baha'u'llah's stupendous revelation. And the Guardian is affirming his conviction that this is a first obligation and the object of the efforts, the constant endeavor of each one of its loyal adherents. So this is a mandate that doesn't go away, friends. And this letter of the dispensation is a very central key element in this understanding, in this adequate understanding. Then after stating that, and we catch our breath and we say, well, how are we ever going to understand this stupendous revelation of Baha'u'llah, which he's about to set forth and expand before our vision? An exact and thorough comprehension of so vast a system, so sublime a revelation, so sacred a trust, is for obvious reasons beyond the reach and ken of our finite minds. So we're not going to be able to have an exact and thorough comprehension of it. It's too vast for that, too sublime a revelation, too sacred a trust. And it just is out there, evasive, beyond the reach and ken of our. Yet, he's told us that it has to be the object of the constant endeavor of the loyal followers of the faith to comprehend this. I studied this dispensation with a baha'i teacher she was the secretary of the National Teaching Committee in North America during the second 7-year plan. Her name was Jesba Herbert. She was appointed to the first board of the protection, auxiliary board members for protection in the Western Hemisphere. And she was very gentle, radiant lady. And she stressed with us, with the youth that studied the document with her, that one should really read this every 6 months because it doesn't change, but we change. And we will see new things in it each time as we grow in our devotion and in our services to the cause. Our capacity to absorb more and more of the system, the revelation, the trust that we've been given will expand as well. I hope that those of you who haven't yet had an opportunity to read the Dispensation of Baha'u'llah will make an effort to get it. And now most of us, if we get it through the computer, we also have the possibility, if you don't have a good English dictionary at hand, to look up words that you don't understand or may be new to us, given the richness of the Guardian's vocabulary and the exactness of the choice of words. We can, however, this is the continuation of the previous paragraph about this whole thing being beyond our finite minds. We can, however, And it is our bounden duty, the second time he has duty in these two paragraphs, duty to seek to derive fresh inspiration and added sustenance as we labor for the propagation of his faith through a clear apprehension of the truths it enshrines and the principles on which it is based. Now, we've all heard quotations as saying that you don't have to have a thorough understanding of the faith in order to teach it. You can still teach the cause. Divine confirmations come to the humblest of us, and we can pass the truths on. But he is stressing that together with that, we have a duty to get fresh inspiration and added sustenance so that we can propagate the cause through a clear apprehension, a clear understanding of the truths it enshrines and the principles on which it is based. And this is the principle of progressive revelation. We're going to come back to that a bit later in the session today. So I'm going to skip over that for the moment. He talks about this dispensation of Baha'u'llah being a dispensation, the potentialities of which we are but beginning to perceive, and the full range of which we can never determine. You remember that in the opening paragraphs of the dispensation, he refers to this as a theophany, the appearance of God to man. This is in line with the progressive revelation. We have a visitation, if you will, from the Spirit of God through the Bab and Baha'u'llah, releasing all the possibilities and blessings and inspiration we need for the next 1,000 years. We can't ever perceive the full range of which we can never determine where the dispensation is going, where the potentialities of the dispensation are going. Gradually, this gets unfolded to our eyes. The faith of Baha'u'llah should indeed be regarded, if we wish to be faithful to the tremendous implications of its message, as the culmination of a cycle, the final stage in a series of preliminary and progressive revelations. Friends, we have to recall, and it's not an easy thing because we've been schooled in this very materialistic outlook of human life. We are reminded, and may it not be one of the great reasons for having obligatory prayers, having us responsible to affirm certain truths every day, to gradually release us from the oppression of this very limited materialistic point of view, which affirms certain scientific theories that have not been substantiated and proven, but because there isn't anything else, we swallow them all and accept it. And then we hold that match that with the revelation, and we miss out on the fact that this creation has a creator, and that all the existence of the universe has been conceived and created and established by him. And he has called creatures such as us into being, and presumably this is done throughout the universe, to recognize him. And that because of the scheme that he has decided to do this, he introduces us with a dual animal and spiritual nature. And the animal nature predominates in us for the most part. And that's why the materialistic drifted away from the revelations that they were given in the past. And they became dogmatic in character This required this outpouring of the vision, which is a capstone to the whole Adamic cycle and opens up this terrific new Baha'i cycle. He establishes the truth of that now. We have a Lord. We have been created by the Lord. He is one. We are sustained by him, that our spiritual nature gives power to our physical nature. And we're dependent on it completely, and therefore dependent on the breath of God, which sustains us. And therefore, how often he refers to us as his, equally translated, his slaves. Nobody likes to hear that now because we all want to rule ourselves and rule the world. But this is what's being said. And somehow coming and approaching the nature of these truths and root principles and teachings which are contained here in the dispensation, cited by the guardian in the dispensation of Baha'u'llah, is the counterweight to draw us out of our habitual materialistic understanding of life, for the most part thinking that our worth is dependent on our possessions and our position in life, and to adopt the humble attitude of a servant of Baha'u'llah and ask that he opens us to his guidance, that his guidance can penetrate and awaken those things which he has hidden in our inner nature. Man doesn't become man on his own. He's been created, yes, that's one, but he also doesn't become one without guidance, and that guidance comes from the manifestations of God. So the word of God, the verses of God, which is the basis of so much of what's written here in the dispensation, they become animating lights that awaken the potentialities we have inherent in us from our creation. We've all been created different. We have various gifts, but those gifts depend on our turning to the light of the Son of Truth, to turning, in that sense, to the light of the truth emanating from the utterances of Baha'u'llah. Now, to this truth, the fact that this is now the age of the promised one, and as he says here again, these beginning with Adam, these dispensations, and ending with the Bab, have paved the way and anticipated with an ever-increasing emphasis the advent of that day of days in which he who is the promise of all ages should be made manifest. Baha'u'llah comes and he addresses the followers of these great religions, particularly Judaism and Christianity and Islam, and demonstrates their oneness, highlights the continuity of the single message which God has been delivering through Abraham, Moses, Christ, and Muhammad, and in this day, the Bab and Baha'u'llah, is a singular message. The speech is one message, and the book is one book. And when the manifestations of God appear each day that they appear, they are the living book of God while they're amongst us. In the Surah-e-Hekal, the tablet of the temple of Baha'u'llah, he explains how the presence of the divinity, the presence of God, is latent in the manifestation of God. If you attain to the presence of the manifestation, you've attained to the presence of God by reflected manifest splendors. And he says, after his passing, you can approach that presence not in the living book, but in the revealed book, by approaching his utterances, by approaching his revealed verses, these life-giving, bountiful outpourings of the manifestation. We spoke previously about the wonders of the times when Baha'u'llah would be visited by God, be visited by the invisible spirit, be visited by a power that he said he can't even penetrate beyond. He can explain how it affects him and how it affects us, how it affects humanity, but he can't get back to the essence of divinity. To this truth, the utterances of Baha'u'llah abundantly testify. A mere reference to the claims which in vehement language and with compelling power he himself has repeatedly advanced the character of the revelation of which he was the chosen bearer. These claims, repeatedly advanced, cannot but fully demonstrate the character of revelation of which he was the chosen bearer. So we can't really choose another way of understanding the revelation. We have to see what it is that Shoghi Effendi sets forth here in the very words of Baha'u'llah. To the words that have streamed from his pen, this is in this case Baha'u'llah's pen, the fountainhead of so impetuous a revelation, we should therefore direct our attention if we wish to obtain a clear understanding of its importance and meaning. The importance and meaning here of this revelation. And then he outlines for us some of the areas that he draws attention to by the quotations that he has set forth in the dispensation. This is I've set this out in this form to help us see each one separately, whether in his assertion of the unprecedented claim he has advanced. You remember that in the first session that we had, we read from the Shoghi Effendi's summary of the Baha'i teachings that he had sent to the Special UN Committee for Palestine before the establishment of the Israeli state. And there he says two things justify recognizing the faith as a world religion, recognizing the Baha'i faith as a world religion. One is the claims that Baha'u'llah himself has advanced. That would be a large part of it, but he said that then is matched and mirrored by the extension of the Baha'i teachings in the world, how they've gone around the world and become an animating force in the life of individuals of all different religious and racial backgrounds. Or then he goes on, in his allusions, Baha'u'llah's allusions to the mysterious forces he has released. This is also, let's just look back up a little bit. So the claims repeatedly advanced cannot but fully demonstrate the character of the revelation. Okay, so now amongst those, besides his claim of his position in religious history and in the history of mankind, he alludes to the mysterious forces he has released. Friends, the manifestation, when the revelation comes to him, it's the effects of it stream out into the world and impregnate the human spirit with the potentialities latent in his revelation. Then he also says, as you know very well, that the coming of the revelation is like the dawn of the sun. It cannot release all of its power, noontime power at the beginning. It gradually needs to establish its powers and release and have them affect the human race. We are presently in a period where he is establishing this. He's moving us towards the common recognition of our humanity, all the peoples of the world, or even the racial tensions in the United States, suddenly we find them reflected back from us from different parts of the world. It's amazing steps that are being taken. And this is, I understand this to be the gradual release of these mysterious forces. And what we read several sessions back from the Forward to God Passes By, where Shoghi Effendi attributes this revelation bursting upon the fortunes of mankind, has set all kinds of processes in motion, and that they're destined to undo the complications we've made in the past, our nationalistic, our racial, understandings that are now tired, the nationalism, which is excessive and is slowing us down in our development, in our reaching to the life and civilization that Baha'u'llah has promised for the human race. Again, there are passages, whether in such passages as extol the glories of his long-awaited day, the promises he makes, we will see those as we get to them now, or magnify these passages that magnify the station which they who have recognized its hidden virtues will attain. All of this Baha'u'llah, and to an almost equal extent, the Bab and Abdul Baha, have bequeathed to posterity minds of such inestimable wealth as none of us who belong to this generation can fittingly estimate. The equivalent of 100 volumes of divine revelation from Baha'u'llah, dictated by him, sometimes written down by himself, sometimes by his secretary, and the secretary himself says, I could get down usually one of every 4 or 5 verses of Baha'u'llah. That was so rapid, the chanting that he chanted of these things as they flowed through him. And he himself talks about how Baha'u'llah at such moments would be completely transformed and shining with the light of the sun. And that at times his words were so powerful that the secretary says, they heard to me to be like peals of thunder rolling off of the manifestation and circling the planet. Afterwards, Baha'u'llah would sit with the secretary or secretaries, because they would swoon and pass out from time to time under the influence of the prophetic revelations that were being released by Baha'u'llah. He would sit with them and review what they'd written and fill in the words that were missing or correct whatever it was, expand what it was he was saying. Then he says, such testimonies bearing on this theme of the greatness of the revelation are impregnated with such power and reveal such beauty as only those who are versed in the languages in which they were originally revealed can claim to have sufficiently appreciated. Puts us at a disadvantage in English, but we have a tremendous advantage in that Shoghi Effendi, as the divinely inspired interpreter, has translated these basic testimonies himself, and we can therefore trust in their validity and balance. Then he explains to us that so numerous are these testimonies that a whole volume would be required to be written in order to compile the most outstanding of these writings, the most outstanding among them of what he's selected. So all I can venture to attempt at present is to share with you only such passages as I have been able to glean from his luminous writings. For I've seen the Zain al-Mughrabin, one of the amanuenses of Baha'u'llah, has written the tablets after they were revealed and approved. He's made copies into handwritten books. And those are what the sum of those various writings to different people and major tablets of Baha'u'llah, all of which is reviewed in the major ones are all reviewed in God Passes By, constitute these 100 volumes that we're talking about. And a cursory examination, and Shoghi Effendi had these volumes, of course. He's very lightly in the margins, highlighted with a pencil down the margin, certain passages which then later appear in the gleanings or in the dispensation. He reviewed into a great number of them. That's why he's talking about a whole volume would be required to compile the most outstanding among them. So he has selected these passages for us. And that's also a reflection of his divinely inspired criterion. What is it that we need in order to crack through the kind of inherited understanding we have of religion at any point in this new dispensation, to establish and form in us some proper vision of who and what Baha'u'llah's revelation, who is Baha'u'llah and what is his revelation. Then in another passage, and now I'm switching, friends, from the dispensation. I'm going to something he wrote a couple of years later, which is the Advent of Divine Justice. Towards the end of the Advent of Divine Justice, Shoghi Effendi wrote the "I can do no better, eager as I am to extend to every one of you any assistance in my power that may enable you to discharge more effectively your divinely appointed, continually multiplying duties, than to direct your attention at this decisive hour to these immortal passages, gleaned in part from the great mass of Baha'u'llah's unpublished and untranslated writings, whether in his revelation," and now he outlines, highlights or foreshadows those quotations that he puts in a number of pages, which are translations that are nowhere else. Maybe one or two of them repeated from the dispensation. I haven't made that study, but you could go and take the passages, lot of immortal passages that he's cited here towards the end of the Advent of Divine Justice. So he highlights the sections: his revelation of the station and functions of his loved ones. You remember there was a similar feature in the quotes in the dispensation. His eulogies of the greatness of cause. There's many more quotations here. He's already referred to the greatness of the day in the dispensation. His emphasis on the importance of teaching. This is very beautiful, the passages here about the central position of promoting the cause of God, this great gift of God to share with others, to announce and proclaim to others the existence of this revelation and its importance to the human race. The dangers, another section which he foreshadows, the counsels he imparts, the warnings he utters, the vistas he discloses, and finally the assurance and promises he gives. Commenting on these again, he says, these dynamic and typical examples of Baha'u'llah's sublime utterance, each having a direct bearing on the tasks which actually face or lie ahead of the American Baha'i community, cannot fail to produce on the minds and hearts of any one of its members, and a condition here, who approaches them with befitting humility and detachment, such powerful reactions as to illuminate his entire being and intensify tremendously his daily exertions. Friends, if you're asking yourself, I don't know why I don't seem to have any energy to go teach the faith, or people are not interested, whatever it is that we think, usually when people are not interested, it's because we're not interested. I don't mean that as a criticism, but examine yourself. If you're not excited about the revelation, how are you going to communicate anything of importance to anybody else? And if you want to illuminate your entire being and intensify your daily efforts, here's the source of it. These quotations that Shoghi Effendi has translated for us. And I would suggest that this essential verities then comes from the quotations in the dispensation and further elaborated here, where there are more translations of passages. Meanwhile, the gleanings has come out, and a lot of these things are then repeated and expanded there. He's gifted us with a tremendous inheritance of his own viewing of it. We have translations afterwards. They'll be revised, they'll be changed. These things of Shoghi Effendi are really going to remain as the cornerstone of our English understanding of the Baha'i faith. Added to this, friends, are a number of further passages related to the proclamation to the kings, which are included in Shoghi Effendi's letter, The Promised Day Is Come. And something that we'll try to look at later on. But here, for the time being, he's stressing how these various examples, these passages from Baha'u'llah, as he said, such testimonies that have such power and reveal such beauty. I've made notebooks where I put one of these quotations on each page, just so that I look at it and I just don't keep reading through. It's in the books there, it's crowded together, you know. So I think it's very important that we examine each of these, that we repeat them out loud, that we read them out loud to ourselves, and we try to gather the necessary energy which would allow us to meditate on them, because it's not enough just to read the verses. We have to cogitate a bit. We have to think about what are the implications of this by itself, and then in the context of the other things that Shoghi Effendi is quoting, and then adding on these passages which we find towards the end of the Advent of Divine Justice. And finally, the whole Revelation set forth samples and examples of passages from the whole Revelation that Shoghi Effendi has gathered in gleanings from the writings of Baha'u'llah, which Shoghi Effendi suggests should become the daily companion of every believer, of every faithful believer, is to have the gleanings at your bedside or at your reading table, wherever you are, on such a magnificent volume from which to choose readings for the morning and evening as mandated by Baha'u'llah in the Kitab-i-Aqdas. One of the things that keeps us going, besides the obligatory prayers, are these passages. And surely the testimonies of Baha'u'llah, of Shoghi Effendi, chosen from Baha'u'llah in the dispensation, and also these immortal passages from the Advent, constitute very worthwhile passages from the writings to be meditated and thought about for our daily readings. All right, friends, let's see now. We have, I wanted to go back to the fundamental Baha'i principles. First, from the dispensation, we already encountered this when we were looking at this summary of the faith, that that Shoghi Effendi provided for the UN committee. Here he states, this is from the dispensation itself, the fundamental principle which constitutes the bedrock of Baha'i belief, the principle that religious truth is not absolute but relative, that divine revelation is orderly, continuous, and progressive, and not spasmodic or final. Well, can't quote it absolutely accurately, but this is the eternal faith of God, eternal in the past, eternal in the future. There's only one faith of God, and that is understood through this revelation to be all of the words of God that have been revealed to previous manifestations of God. It's one book. And part of the basic principles of the Baha'i faith is to establish the oneness of religion, meaning that the followers of the past religions should embrace this revelation. This is the command of God. And whoever fails to recognize in this new revelation the spirit and guidance of their own revelation has immediately denied their own faith. This is a very great challenge. If you put it there, he says, doesn't give it kind of any wiggle room. He's really stating that this has to be very seriously considered by everybody. And when we teach progressive revelation, we have to be careful we don't fall back in affirming that, well, Baha'is, if you follow your own faith, if you're faithful and, dutiful and really believe, that'll be all right. That'll be fine. No, it's not all right, friends. You're not being faithful to Baha'u'llah or to the cause of God to say such a thing, because it lets them off the hook. They shouldn't come off the hook. They have to weigh and measure this. They need to investigate, as Baha'u'llah says, the independent investigation of truth is the only way we're going to get people to come out of their fixed ideas and fanaticism and misinterpretations of these primary revelations of the past and bring them into a clear understanding of the light of this new day of God that's come upon us. So after this, we come back again to Shoghi Effendi's enunciation in the statement to the UN committee. Fundamental principle enunciated by Baha'u'llah. And you won't find this anywhere else in the writings of the Guardian. This is the most complete statement he has of it. And you have it in one of the first documents that was made available to you for the course here, which is the statement to that committee complete. You can find the sentence there, not broken up the way I've done it here, but I wanted us to take note that there are these individual points that are so important. So this principle enunciated by Baha'u'llah, the followers of his faith, because he's speaking to non-Baha'is, they firmly believe is that religious truth is not absolute but relative. Friends, this is why we have to adhere to the revelation for the day in which we live. This is why is relative. There's nothing, as Shoghi Effendi said, there's nothing about the oneness of mankind in Christ's teachings. There's nothing about the oneness of the world even in Christ's teachings. It was too early. There was no way to see that it was beyond them. I think I mentioned before that if Baha'u'llah started talking about how we should relate to people on other planets, it would be discontinuous with what he's brought here. This is relative to the progress of the world, the progress of science, the present potentialities that Baha'u'llah has released. It's all relative to the state of mankind now, and is not to be found in any complete form in the revelations of the past, though we'll be told it is by the followers of those religions who want to say that the Baha'i faith is a copy of their own teachings. But we can see from these quotations, which we'll begin studying next week, we will see how far beyond the declarations, the testimonies of Baha'u'llah are beyond what happened in the past. Now, along with this revelation being continuous and progressive, he's telling us that all the great religions of the world are divine in origin, that their basic principles are in complete harmony, basic principles, that their aims and purposes are one and the same, that their teachings are but facets of one truth, that their functions are complementary, that they differ only in the non-essential aspects of their doctrines, and that their missions represent successive stages in the spiritual evolution of human society. I wish we might all take time to look at each one of those bulleted points here and think of where we have what we have in the teachings. For instance, the second to the last, they differ only in the non-essential aspects of their doctrines. The essential, Abdu'l-Baha says, the religious teachings can be divided into two categories: the essential aspects of the doctrines of the faith and the non-essential. The non-essential have to do with worldly matters and worldly affairs and with diet or with the prescription of maybe which obligatory prayer needs to be established for our dispensation. Prayer is a permanent aspect. Love of God is an essential aspect. These are essential aspects. They don't change. And that it's on that basis that we can see the oneness of the divine missions of the prophets of the past. They are successive stages in the spiritual evolution of human society. Now, about here, it'd probably be good to look again at Shoghi Effendi's In the Goal of a New World Order and so on, where he describes how social evolution has paralleled spiritual evolution of human society. With these successive revelations, the humanity has passed through the stages of the unity of family, of tribe, of city-state, and finally nationhood, and now the call to global international organization. Because of all of this, now I quote, this is from another part, but it's equally an important element here. Nor does Baha'u'llah claim finality for his own revelation, but rather stipulates that a fuller measure of the truth he has been commissioned by the Almighty to vouchsafe to humanity at so critical a juncture in its fortunes must needs be disclosed at future stages in the constant and limitless evolution of mankind. Notice how he's saying that the future prophets, their manifestations will be a fuller measure of the truth he has been commissioned by the Almighty to vouchsafe to humanity. Quite interesting, because you say, oh, well, the next revelation has to be completely new and different and so on. The letters that we have from the Guardian talking about this, he said there will be a greater outpouring of truth, but this revelation, because it represents the coming of age of the human race, has a very special position in the history of the mankind's unfoldment and its spiritual. We'll have more things to do in eons of the future, but that's not our problem. Our problem now is try to get to the presence of this revelation that the Bab and Baha'u'llah have given us, and help them to reflect on where it's going to take us and how they don't lose anything by moving forward. They just gain. By recognizing Baha'u'llah, you come to encompass all the religions of the past, all the best of everything. Well, friends, let me take a look over here and see what's going on with the chat. Wow, it's a lot of chat here. I don't think I can get through all of that. Greetings from here and there, including Pasadena. We're jumping all over the world.
11:46. There's a question from Sue ML.
I have this black thing on the side of my screen, which doesn't even let me see some of the things that are quoted here. Anyway, let's see. Susan Emil has a question. So very grateful for your time to assist us. Thanks. Hello, Zagreb. Sorry, friends. Yeah, this is a question. What will it take to activate us to such an extent that we can't help but share Baha'u'llah's message with everyone we meet? Well, I think inherent in the quotations that we had tonight is that this will charge us up so much if we do this properly, study these immortal passages, study these various sections of the dispensation of Baha'u'llah, we will be compelled. When I go to buy coffee, the people ask me, so what are you going to do today? I say, I'm having a Zoom class with reaches out. I think it goes to about 20 countries or something. They said, what's the subject? That opens up the possibility to talk about the faith.
That's it. That's the only question.
Well, there's still more here. I don't know what to, let's see if there's no more questions. So lots of thank yous. Friends, I appreciate your patience with me. You realize that these are all the way I'm absorbing these writings, and I have given some classes on them over the years. But you have to go and study it for yourself and make it your own. Thank you so much. I think that's it for this week, and I look forward to see you again next week.